Welcome to part 2 of the Jack the Ripper podcast tour. After the murder of Elizabeth Stride, the Ripper headed west, as do we. At the bottom of Henrik Street, turn right. Cross Backchurch Lane and go down Hooper Street. At the crossroads, take a right along LEMAN Street. The police station on your left was still being built in 1888, but its cells were used to hold suspects picked up during the Ripper investigation. At the end of the street, turn left, cross the street and continue round to Aldgate. The Ripper murders sent Whitechapel into a spiral of fear and suspicion. The police granted a form of amnesty to local prostitutes, guaranteeing their safety and freedom from arrest if they solicited, ironically, around St. Botolph's Church, now next to Aldgate Tube. The spot became known as Prostitutes' Island. At the bottom of Duke's Place, on the night of Elizabeth Stride's murder, a man claimed to have seen Catherine Eddowes speaking to a gentleman aged about 30 with a fair complexion and medium build. It was about 1:30 in the morning, about an hour after Elizabeth Stride's death. If you go a little way along Duke's Place, you will find St. James's Passage, which leads into MITRE Square. Less than half an hour after this sighting, Catherine Eddowes was found here, murdered and mutilated with appalling savagery. The aura surrounding this killer as an insatiable predator was growing quickly, fed all the time by an equally insatiable press.
One of the reasons that Jack the Ripper excited not only Britain but the world was it was about sex. And we have to be very honest here, sex sells. Now, this is a madman who was very, very weird in his sexual habits, but that also fascinates most ordinary people, that somebody is so departed from the norm. And there's no doubt about it that when you get a newspaper churning out this stuff every day, maybe even possibly exaggerating some of the stories, certainly reminding their readers that on this date this girl went missing. Now we have another one. It would be horrible to say that some editors might have woken up every morning thinking, will there be another murder today? But there's no doubt about it, it was great for circulation.
We are now on the trail of Jack the Ripper as he fled the scene. Leave MITRE Square through MITRE Passage to the north, turn right down Creechurch Lane, continue to the end of the road, then bear right, and continue in the same direction along Gravel Lane. Onto New Goulston Street, then left onto Goulston Street itself. As he made his escape, the killer dropped a blood-soaked scrap of Catherine Eddowes' apron in a doorway here, before continuing on his way. It had been used to clean the murder weapon, and was left under some fresh graffiti that no one has ever satisfactorily interpreted. It read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." It was soon wiped away by the police for fear of inflaming racial tension in the area. This was a normal police attitude to crime scenes and forensic investigation.
The scene of the crime in 1888 and the scene of the murders of these prostitutes was seen in a light that didn't really attach any significance to them. The most important thing, so far as officers were concerned, it would seem at the time, was to get the scene cleaned up before anybody else saw it. The senior officers were paranoid that the locals would see the crime scene and as a result of that, involve in some sort of civil disturbance. The writing on the wall was washed away. Pools of blood were slooshed away very, very quickly. The body was removed immediately to the mortuary, and the whole evidence that anything had happened untoward at the scene was washed away and cleared away. There was no real concept of recording the scene, of photographing it, although by this time the bodies were photographed at the mortuary, but this would seem to be more to do with the identification of the face of the victim rather than the evidence.
Head north up Bell Lane. After about 200 metres, turn right down White's Row. These light industrial units were once alleys and yards crowded with lodging houses. It was an area of scandalous poverty and rampant crime. The adjacent Dorset Street was described several years later by the Daily Mail as the worst street in London. This break in the curb marks the old entrance to Miller's Court. It was to number 13 Miller's Court that 25-year-old prostitute Mary Kelly took a customer in the small hours of Friday, the 9th of November. Her body was found the next morning. The privacy of the lodging room had allowed the Ripper to perform an act of almost total destruction on Mary Kelly's body.
Trying to formulate any view of the sort of person who committed these crimes is terribly difficult, partly because serial killing in which there's a lot of mutilation is very unusual indeed, but also because you have to understand the context and the time. It's in a particular area. He's seeking out victims. He's clearly plausible to the victims because they're not running away from him. He needs contact with those victims in the early stages and therefore must present himself to them as a reasonably effective individual, not somebody who seems to be really bizarre. He's able to get away from the victims fairly readily without being noticed, so he can merge back into the crowd and into the situation and find somewhere to get to quite conveniently without anybody noticing him.
Most believe Mary Kelly was the last victim of Jack the Ripper, although there were more prostitute murders in the years that followed, sometimes attributed to Jack. Certainly his terrifying legacy of violence lingered in Whitechapel and beyond. But he would take on a new persona, reinvented to terrify and entertain.
Popular cinema's always moved on story. It's always been about story, and this is a great story. I mean, all the elements are there. The mysterious killer, the fallen women, the police officer trying to solve the murder. So, and foggy London, an old city, a mysterious city, a dark city.
At the end of White's Row, you will see the 10 Bells pub across the road. A tavern has stood here for 250 years. Mary Kelly was seen drinking here on the night of her death, and it is the final stop on our tour. Discover more by visiting the Jack the Ripper and the East End exhibition at the museum in Docklands until the 2nd of November 2008.